Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Global Compliance Panel's live webinar on South Korea, navigating the regulatory and clinical trial environment. My name is Michael, and I will be your host today. On behalf of the Global Compliance Panel team, I'd like to thank you all for being part of this event. Today's webinar will be presented by Robert J. Russell. Mr. Russell, for the past 9 years, has been the president of RJR Consulting Incorporated. The company assists the pharmaceutical, medical device, and biotech industries in understanding and complying with international regulations affecting compliance, new product development, manufacturing, and quality assurance. RJR has offices in Columbus, Ohio, in Washington, D.C., Brussels, and Belgium, with exclusive affiliates across Asia and Latin America. Robert has over 28 years of past industry experience as a CMC specialist, R&D director, and global director of regulatory affairs for Merck Dow Pharmaceuticals and Corus Dow Medical Devices. He has a MS degree in chemistry, and we are honored to have Mr. Russell to present this webinar for us. And before we begin, I just want to quickly outline the program for today's session. This webinar is for a 90-minute duration. First, Bob will go ahead and take you through today's webinar, highlighting the areas that would be covered, and then he would go ahead and share his presentation. And I'd like to inform all the participants that once part of this teleconference, you will be placed on mute and would remain so until the Q&A window begins, which would again be towards the end of the session. It's again just to ensure that there is no discontinuity and to allow Robert to speak clearly so that everyone present could take maximum benefit from this session. And also request all of you to hold your questions back until the Q&A window begins. You would have a 10-minute duration time allotted to you during the end of the session for all your questions. And for any reason, if all of you do get logged out of the session, please follow the same procedure to join back in. And now that we're all set, I would request Bob to take it through. Bob?
Thank you very much, Michael. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're calling in from. Welcome to the webinar of this afternoon on South Korea navigating the regulatory and clinical trial environment. The first slide I show here is just a summary of what Michael just recently covered about my bio. It also has my contact points, my email address, as well as my mobile and office number. Our company is a global regulatory consulting firm. We work across drugs, medical devices, biologics, and combination products across all the major countries. As was mentioned, we have offices around the world, in the U.S., in Europe, in Latin America, and in Asia Pacific. We assist clients on several points that you'll see here on this slide relative to being an authorized legal representative in many of the countries. We also assist in the area of strategy development, clinical trial setup, and after clinical trials, of course, the registration and licensing of products. And after that, even on licensing renewal, keeping the license conditions up on your registration, which is typically called a variation or an amendment filing in most parts around the world. We also assist in getting the plant registered from a manufacturing authorization standpoint. We also help in the area of drug master files or device master files. We have certified medical writers on our staff. We also get involved with local assistance in the country with CRO selection and management of that CRO. One of the things we also assist on is what we'll call mock audits. These can be GCP audits or GMP audits prior to the healthcare authority coming into the facility to do the inspection. We also represent our clients in the area of regulatory affairs and government affairs directly to the healthcare authority of the individual country. So in this particular situation with Korea, with KFDA. About 20% of our time is spent on training, and about 80% is spent on one-on-one projects with our clients. So our agenda today is going to look as the following. We're going to first start off just discussing Korea's overall healthcare system. We're going to discuss the regulatory agency structure and responsibilities in the country. We'll be going down through the drug development process and the individual steps that you'll be encountering in Korea as well, and how the agency really makes key decision-making steps in the process of approving clinical trials as well as licensing. We'll be covering how South Korea fits into the International Conference on Harmonization, ICH, from the standpoint of ICH, GCP, and GMP. We're going to be discussing the requirements for conducting a clinical study in South Korea, how they want to be involved in clinical trials, the issue of meeting with the agency prior to the trial kicking off to be able to make sure that your application will be compliant and accepted. We'll talk about how to apply for clinical studies and clinical research and the CTA application, how to amend the CTA, what are some of the likely parameters that are going to define trials as far as KFDA is concerned. We'll talk about trial startup and GCP. Also, priority reviews in South Korea. When may you file for an accelerated review on your application? We'll talk about pharmacovigilance reporting on clinical studies. We'll talk about clinical trial closeout and the eventual trial reporting requirements in the country. I'll also discuss some cultural aspects of working within the country that will be helpful to you. And we'll be discussing working with the regulatory bodies, the regulatory agencies, and the various committees in South Korea. Primarily, you'll be working with KFDA. Then we'll have some final comments and a summary and wrap-up, and we'll go into our Q&A session, which will be about the last 10 minutes of our time together today. So an overview of South Korea. It was formerly called the Republic of Korea. It's got a population of approaching 50 million people, and 20 million of those live in and around the surrounding Seoul area. The currency in the won and the exchange rate, I just give you here, it was, again, fluctuates a little bit, but just so you have it. The legal system in the country was originally based on continental European civil law. The legal systems in both Japan and the United States, however, have influenced how South Korea's system has developed. The country is economically stable and strong in South Korea, and advanced and westernized medical infrastructure, meaning hospital systems, support systems, are better than most countries within Asia. There's an extremely high level of literacy, 98%, and the college education rate is as high as 84% in the country, so it's rather unique within the region. The healthcare system is largely made up of privately owned healthcare providers. It's a combination of both Western and traditional Korean medicine. The medical costs for general hospitals are comparably low and covered by the national health insurance system within the country. And all workers in an individual company are covered by one or four insurance systems. Either the National Healthcare Insurance Scheme that I mentioned, a pension insurance system, and unemployment insurance, and workers' accident insurance. And these systems are paid for typically jointly, both by the company as well as a copay by the employee. The various medical centers must pass KFDA inspection in order to participate in either a phase 2 or phase 3 clinical trial study. So there's also a select number which have also been given a permit for phase 1 trials. You'll see there's about 33 which have been approved for phase 1 studies, and approximately 88 which will have phase 2 site approval, and 110 which will be all the way approved to all the way phase 3 studies. And this number continues to grow as there is continuing interest in doing clinical research in South Korea. The teaching hospitals are very modern with equipment, up-to-date laboratories and instrumentation. They can run studies on their own. So there really is a limited need for what we call SMOs. They're site management organizations, which traditionally work hand in hand with the CROs in the region. But Korea is pretty self-sufficient. So specialty hospitals and general hospitals, both of them can find their way to be qualified on KFDA's list to conduct clinical studies. There is a society called the Korean Society for Clinical Trials, and they have a push on to try to attract global multinational studies for Korea. So you will find that they're trying to get out of the business of conducting bridging studies and trying to be part of a global clinical trial as the individual product is being trialed elsewhere around the world. The reason is they want to be in a position that when an individual manufacturer is looking to license the product in North America or Europe, they want to be in a position to also have evaluated the product such that they can also be approached for licensure about the same time, therefore getting around what is termed to be the drug lag, where Korea and Asia in general may be thought of later on in the global development program. Therefore, innovative products don't work their way to the marketplace a lot of times till 7, 8, 10 years later after they've already been licensed in either Europe or North America. And as you'll see, the number of clinical trials has risen dramatically in the last several years to now there are well over 400 trials per year being conducted in Korea. So there's a lot of multinational studies coming to the country with global pharmaceutical participation. Let's talk about the regulatory agency structure and their responsibilities. The main body you'll be working with will be the Korea Food and Drug Administration, KFDA. Their mantra is to promote public health, ensuring safety and efficacy, and that safe products make their way into the marketplace. They operate under the supervision of the Ministry of Health and Welfare. So as you see here, their responsibilities include the manufacture and supply of safe food and pharmaceuticals, strengthening law enforcement, establishing a system designed to support both the food industry and the life sciences industry, promoting private sector participation, and improving public services as well. Excuse me. And also improving the administrative capabilities within the agency, within KFDA, to better serve the public, and also seeking international cooperation with other major healthcare authorities around the world. One of the groups you'll be working with is the NIFDS, and they are kind of an offshoot group dealing primarily with food safety management. So if you were going to be someone who was looking to bring those kind of products into the country, you'd be working with them. The research, the safety management, the tox, the pharma research that goes on deals with them. They also get involved with preclinical studies and also approving these products' licensure into the country. The main functions of KFDA is, you'll see from a structural standpoint, they have a general planning and coordination section with many offices, various teams, the Food Safety Bureau that I mentioned, They have a Pharmaceutical Safety Bureau and 4 divisions within that for evaluating various pharmaceutical products, cosmetics, and controlled substances like narcotics. They also approve the manufacture or import of both pharmaceuticals and biologics. They also have a significant safety evaluation office, and these would be there to control the safety and review the standards of the specific food products, drugs, and medical devices which are being placed on the marketplace, as well as the review of the safety data while those products are on the market under a licensure standpoint. And of course, this data is reviewed prior to renewing the license on that particular product. They have a National Institute of Toxicological Research department, actually 3 departments, which will actually test, review, and evaluate the safety and efficacy data which has been submitted for licensure. They have various regional offices across the country, and the National Institute of Food and Drug Safety Evaluation has been there to, again, establish the safety and efficacy evaluation of pharmaceuticals, the infrastructure for risk assessment of these products as they enter the marketplace, and to promote specialization and globalization in the field of laboratory animal care. As I mentioned, the Ministry of Health and Welfare is above KFDA, the same way you'll see it in many countries around the world. And this is particularly a common structure inside of Asia. So their mission is at a higher level to protect the public from risks, to promote social integration, to invest in human resources, and provide the social services to improve the quality of life for their patient and overall population. The process of a regulatory submission involves submitting a clinical trial application to KFDA at least 45 to 60 days, someplace in that window, before the intended start of the trial. The CTA will include several documents such as SOPs that are being planned to carry out the study plan. And once the CTA is submitted, along with the protocol for the trial, it'll be reviewed by both KFDA as well as an ethics committee, which in the country are called individual review boards, or IRBs, before the approval is going to be granted. So again, similarly in Korea, you need to have the IRB review, which is primarily from a safety standpoint, and the CTA being reviewed by KFDA from an overall clinical trial perspective. Clinical trial applications are mandatory for the following products. All investigational products, when the trials are not designed as bioequivalent studies for generics, that fall within the various product categories. So all those that are intended to be prescription medicines involving a new API, a route of administration, a new indication, a new dose, or a new usage, along with ingredients that are identical to registered medicines with what we call non-expired reexamination periods. Also for investigational products from a biological standpoint, in those there's several listings of products that meet the definition of biologics, and of course one of those are going to be recombinant DNA type technology. So the drug development process, as it exists today, is the application will flow to the authorities. We'll have a sponsor investigator team being named. And the preparation of all of the documents and applications and appendix forms concerning the initiation, the change, and the premature termination and completion of the trial will be part of that package. The application will then go in to the head of the medical institution where the IRB will be located. They will wind up doing the safety assessment from an ethical standpoint, and KFDA will receive both the Ethics Committee application as well as the CTA. And they will discuss that with the ministry as they would see fit, and the head of the medical institution where the clinical study is going to be submitted will give their approval on that ethical application as well. And as the trial progresses, the dialogue that is seen here will flow between the medical institution, the sponsor, and with some involvement with KFDA from a reporting standpoint. The procedure for filing the application is as follows. The appropriate forms are pulled, completed, sent to FDA. The trial can be initiated after there's been a protocol review by the approved IRB and the CTA has been reviewed by KFDA. They'll review that application. They will notify the results of their review to the ministry in case the ministry has any additional dialogue they want to make back to KFDA. If they ask you for more information, you're required to submit it. It may be requested and shall be expected to be supplied by the sponsor. And if any of the items originally reported have changed, a notification or an amendment to the protocol is required as well. KFDA is also requiring that if the trial has been discontinued prematurely, that they be notified about this. And also, all serious adverse events are under the header of mandatory reporting in South Korea. So, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, they really want to be part of global clinical studies to be able to license products a lot earlier than they would have under later on bridging studies. There's currently no method which has been calculated or suggested to recommend a certain number of patients for a given phase trial. They allow the sponsor to dialogue as to how they came up with the appropriate number that the sponsor thought was appropriate. And they take into a fact such as the number of regions within the country which are being included, the target indication, the risk level, where the product has been either on the market or trialed before, and the relevant ratio between the number of total global patients and Korean subjects. And this can be part of the pre-IND consultation that you have with KFDA, your population size, patient size on the individual phased study for the specific product. There is currently very limited orphan drug parameters set up in Korea. So it's very difficult to get them. There's no specific legislation on orphans today. You may be able to have a consultation with them relative to orphan studies. They may reduce the fees. They may also do a bridge review, an accelerated review, such that you can get the trial up and running quicker. Discuss the IRBs a little more. In Korea, there's no national ethics committee or now national IRB. Each medical center runs its own IRB session. They meet approximately once a month. So each hospital has their own requirements for what they expect to review as being part of that clinical trial. Obviously, the protocol, the investigator's brochure, the case report form that's being used, are generally common requirements across all the centers. The IRB is being responsible for approving the clinical trial agreement, typically between the hospital and the sponsor, is what you will see as well as common practice. And the IRB submission is independent from the IND or CTA application submission to KFDA. And they can go in simultaneously as well. The only thing is, if the IRB comes back to you with recommendations on the protocol, for example, and that has to be amended, then you'll have to reapply your CTA application with those changes back into KFDA. But you can definitely save yourselves roughly 2 months by doing a parallel submission to the IRB and KFDA. So the approval process is typically most sponsors will want to have a pre-IND consultation. They will have process questions, they will have regulatory questions, they will have data type questions as to whether they have enough information in their preclinical work in the package to consider being ready for a phase 1 study. Then after that occurs, if everything goes well there and the results of that consultation are positive, the IND submission goes in. There will be the review of that application and the documents, the approval of that, and that will go to the hospital. The IRB process, similarly from the standpoint of submission, review, and approval, will also go, and an overall contract with the hospital will be created with these 2 documents together. Typically takes about 30 working days for this to happen. So some of the process breakdowns here under KFDA, from the standpoint of having a pre-IND consultation, you'll see they charge a fee for that meeting, the IND submission, 5 phase of study, the review of the following documents, about 30 business days of working days for the approval, and the IRB submission with many of the same documents going in, the CV of the investigators, the review of these, the approval, typically within 1 to 2 months. So these can go side by side and come out of the process, like I said, as long as there's no major changes within the protocol structure. So the clinical study structure is as follows. You'll have the sponsor, the pharmaceutical company, typically hiring a CRO for assistance on the trial, the application of the clinical study, and going to the site involved where the coordinators, the SMAs, the IRB information will reside. You'll have a contract between the 2. You'll have case report forms flowing between the 2, adverse event reporting back and forth from the sites to the sponsor. And you'll typically have a site monitoring audit occurring on the sites as well. So, of course, informed consent back and forth between the site and the patient, additional explanation as needed from the investigators. And sometimes, like I mentioned, there's the SMOs, the site management organizations, involved and off to the side in assisting with finding patients for studies as well. There's an agency review process here once you get past clinical work for drug licensing. And what you see here at the top is from the applicant standpoint, the applicant will have an application review going for licensure into KFDA. Side by side, there'll be a GMP review happening with the facility of manufacture. If the plant's in Korea, it will there'll typically be an inspection of the facility. The plants outside the Korea, they will look to see which agency has recently inspected the facility and whether it's been granted GMP status or not. It is a agency which is a highly globally respected agency, which means, obviously FDA, any of the major European countries, typically also Japan. They will, and it's been inside of 2 years. They have the option of foregoing an additional GMP inspection. Obviously, then KFDA will use internal committees to review the dossier, also external consultants. These reports will flow into the ministry. The ministry also has experts on staff and outside of their staff that they can bring in for the recommendations from KFDA, but the actual approval of the license is through the Ministry of Health and Welfare. And that comes directly from MOHW to the applicant. Let's talk a little bit about ICH and how Korea looks at ICH. Obviously, they're not one of the major triumvirates of ICH. It's the United States, Japan, and Europe. However, what you'll see is Korea works very, very closely as an umbrella nation under ICH rules. And so many of the things you're going to be looking at from the standpoint of GCP and GMP are going to be basically seamless to what you're operating in under GMP in the United States or GMP in Europe. So again, ICH in their promotion of harmonization of requirements to prevent duplication of clinical studies. Obviously, the Korean patient populations are included from the standpoint of size and body weight, and wanting to have evaluated a certain number of patients in those regions for that particular purpose. There's also the physiological debate that goes on, whether there's any differences there, just like in Japan. But nevertheless, they typically like to see a Korean patient population as part of the studies prior to licensure. ICH has come a long way in the last 10 years. They had small involvements in FDA and Europe and MHLW in Japan, and the influence they had on those three systems. But now they have a significant influence, a much bigger share of influence, and harmonization has really progressed under ICH. Again, the goal here is to be able to have a submission in one area be accepted in the other two areas outside of translation requirements, of course, and that one application, such as the Common Technical Documents format for licensure, can be accepted under the ICH countries. And if you've got an ICH dossier prepared for FDA, you can take that dossier, file it to Europe, file it to Japan, and it will be accepted the way it's been prepared. This has been one of the major accomplishments that ICH has had, and it certainly has helped to streamline the regulatory burden and globalization of innovative products. So ICH guidelines are not intended to be comprehensive, covering all aspects of product development and registration, but they are intended to be used with any regional requirements as well. So what you'll see within Korea is very, very close alignment with both GCP and GMP, as I mentioned earlier, in the three triumvirate areas under ICH. Let's discuss the requirements for clinical trials in South Korea and the process that's involved. I mentioned the process steps a little bit earlier. You notified the results of the pre-IND meeting. An IND application will go in, and the various applications, the development plan being required, and information on the chemical makeup, structure, physiochemical, biologic properties have to be put into the IND application, including that for the placebo as well. The non-clinical data, you'll see there's a requirement here for a pharmacological effect section, a toxicity data section, just the way that you're used to supplying it in other parts of the world. Other non-tox data, again, according to the specific properties of the drug or biologic that's being studied. Other reference clinical trial data on the product elsewhere in the world can be brought forth. The protocol itself, reference documents that you want to use from the white papers. The investigator's brochure will be part of the submission package, of course. In the approval of the IND, as I mentioned, this pre-meeting typically is done about 40 days prior to submitting the application. The notice of the results of that meeting typically come 10 days later, and the IND application will take about 30 business days to be reviewed by KFDA. For the IRB review board purposes, the committee will primarily do an ethical review of each application. They meet twice a month, so depending on the timing that the actual application shows up on their doorstep, if you just missed it, it may take you 2 weeks to get back onto the next agenda again. They're an administrative staff who manage the application and documentation review, again at the IRB at the facility, at the hospital. Required documents should be submitted to the committee approximately 14 to 16 business days prior to each meeting which has been scheduled with them, where you would like feedback on the information that you've submitted. The results of their review are committed through written notification back to the sponsor, and then the sponsor will submit the particular case and request both to KFDA and to the IRB, typically in parallel. So again, the Ethics Committee application will go into the IRB, the CTA will go into KFDA, and like I mentioned, this does streamline the time in getting both approvals going. The principal investigator or investigators which have been called out on the study are not allowed to influence the members of the committee at the IRB or to participate in the decision-making process as well. The number of copies required of the protocol to be submitted to the IRB depends on each IRB. It ranges someplace between 5 and 20 copies. And there's a review fee which isn't too steep, typically between $400 to $900 for reviewing the protocol. What we've done here in just kind of a tabular format is list out the required documentation, both for the clinical trial application, the CT, for a modification of the amount of administration or indications for any marketed products, doing a clinical study on a quasi-drug, a medical device, or a product for diagnosis purposes, post-market surveillance responsibilities, and under the scientific research column, which documents they will want to see. Continuing on, again, you'll see more details of the research fee, written information provided to subjects, including compensation. And again, a timetable, as we've talked. It's just a little easier to follow in tabular format, so we have set this up. So there's a column here that you'll see which I call suggested time frame, and then what actually takes place, because many of us know that what the healthcare authorities post as their normal timing for review and what happens in real life are two different things. So I wanted to give you our experience and our flavor historically of how long it really does take. So as I mentioned, the meeting, which is optional, you don't have to have a pre-IND meeting, typically is someplace between 40 to 60 days. You know, they're expecting to see the application coming in to request the meeting, what questions you specifically have, what do you want to know from a process, from a regulatory, from a information content standpoint. The meeting itself is typically, happens within 1 day of time. The notification of their results, they say they notify you within 24 days. It's typically about twice that. The review for the IND application itself, again, they have a timetable of 30 days. Our experience is someplace between 2 to 4 months. So as you can see, as you move down the chart, I won't cover every one of these, there is what can be posted at the healthcare authority and what can be expected based on a real-life scenario. So as we've discussed a little bit, Korea prior to 2007 was typically most of the times part of a bridging study where post-marketing data in the U.S. and the EU have been taken into consideration for the overall approval because the products had been on the market in both those locations. There wasn't really a Korean patient population trialed for the product. So if you really wanted to get your license in Korea, you wound up having to do a bridging study. Today, they really are trying to get out of the bridging study business, and they're trying to encourage inclusion as a country within a global clinical trial. Their rationale here is that this can be much more efficient, can lead to the globalization, rapid development of drugs much more effectively. The products get to the patient much quicker from a registration and licensing standpoint, the drug lag issue I talked about earlier. So they have been really, since 2007, really pushing for inclusion in global clinical trials. So as I mentioned, in some areas such as orphan drugs or drugs that have a life-threatening disease or indication involved with them, it may sometimes be difficult to conduct a domestic dose-finding study just because of the limited number of patients. And in some cases, it should be considered as performing a phase 3 trial with physicians strictly monitoring the trial itself. So the rationale for the data being run in a Korean patient population, whether they lived in Korea or outside of Korea, doesn't really matter. The argument there is body size, body mass, and weight, a PK study being required to understand dosage safety and pharmacokinetics better on the investigational product, to compare the results with non-Korean patient populations, to get a better flavor in confirming risk level for their national population as well. So their desire for involvement comes with a lot of positives behind why consider Korea for a clinical trial study. There's quite a bit of infrastructure support. You've got highly motivated investigators and large hospitals with patient access in major cities. a large pharma market that is growing in Korea, the increasing healthcare expenditures and patient populations being much more cognizant of modern medicine, a fast-aging country as well, pretty efficient regulatory agency in KFDA. They openly communicate. They review timelines. They're pretty good as far as from a global agency standpoint of working with them. They want to be involved in global clinical studies, as we've said. They have good trial centers in the country. Their staff at the various hospitals are trained, and they have good training in conducting clinical research locally. And the IRB processes in the individual institutions are efficient. So some of the advantages of considering Korea as a country to run some trials in are the following. First of all, cost. Enrollment's pretty quick. Compliance inside the trial as far as patients listening to their investigator or physician that's taking care of them. Compliance is high. It's a small country, densely populated, so it's easy to get to a lot of the trial centers. The logistics play a major role in why sponsors consider Korea as well. Highly qualified clinical staffs trained on GCP and standard operating procedures as well. High enrollment rates. Their attitude of participating in a trial is a very, very positive one. They're recruited from investigator pools of patients, of key opinion leaders who are specialists within a given indication area. So you definitely have the ability to identify the KOLs and attract patients of theirs into the various studies as well. Participation by investigators, they're highly motivated. They want to be on the cutting edge of advances as well. The GCP training programs that go on in the country all the time. And the KFDA review system is a good system today. It's fairly efficient, it's practical, and you can expect good open communications between the agency and yourselves in the process. The quality of the clinical trial sites also goes on the list. I talked about their modern equipment and capabilities. They're all qualified. They all go through a rigorous qualification process by KFDA, so you're rest assured that you're going to be dealing with an institution which has gone through a high level of scrutiny by the agency. The ultimate pharmaceutical market is growing in Korea, as we talked about. And Japan also accepted data from both Korea and Taiwan into evaluating products down the road in the pipeline. The topic of conducting meetings with KFDA, they have a no user fee system on certain consultations. As I mentioned, the pre-IND consultation, there typically is a fee of about $4,000 attached to that because it becomes a significant time element with the agency, with the number of things that they have to do to get you back written answers on that basis. They prefer face-to-face meetings as compared to conference calls and WebExes, etc. And the timeline, as we've talked about here, in what happens with the pre-IND session, the first KFDA internal review, the organization of their consultation team on your application. They'll have a second review, then they'll have a face-to-face consultation session, and an overall review on your IND application and ultimate decision on that application back to the applicant. A little bit of an organization standpoint from an IND submission, documentation requirements that we've got listed here for you, covering the application, the protocol, and the related documents, the various certificates that are going to be required for the facilities, what will be required from the standpoint of specifications and test methods of the investigational medicinal product. There's a particular KFDA template that's required for the submission of this data. The safety and efficacy data, same thing. There's a KFDA template that gets utilized under a development plan and the introduction as well. The information on the actual product itself, the non-clinical study data that's being required, the clinical study data also being submitted within a KFDA template as well, a list of reference reports that you want to utilize on the product as well, and of course the investigator's brochure. The concept of amending the clinical trial protocol or the clinical trial application is based on ICH. And it really goes into place to be able to handle changes that the IRBs have had and or KFDA have had in the review of either the CTA or of the protocol. So anything that happens relative to the guideline for the conduct of the trial, the quality control for all aspects of the trial, any kind of changes to the written agreements between the sponsor and the investigator or participants in the study, other legal documents, or to procure funding for the trial can all be items that can trigger an amendment to the original protocol. So what should you really anticipate as you're trying to define the parameters around the clinical study for Korea? And what you'll see is they've got some of the better global research centers around the world to realistically anticipate the study performance that's going to happen, to utilize their research staff to increase productivity and efficiency. So this gets at the cost issue of running trials in Korea. They've consistently streamlined their startup practices. They have very, very good patient recruitment. They deliver timely and high-quality data in the country from the standpoint of the clinical trial centers. They have standardized practices. They have networks of local physicians and KOLs who really want to see their patients exposed to better innovative treatments, better products for their particular indication. The country's got good access to technology. The centers themselves have had very, very positive audits by the regulatory agencies from a global perspective. And the centers want to be a leader in the industry and role models for other countries as well. And of course, they have to be financially stable at the same time. So their view of what's needed to really establish sound, solid sites is a strong commitment from the management team at the site. Obviously, the key is people, appropriate funding, enough projects. Their training systems are excellent. Many of them carry the appropriate accreditations necessary for doing the work that they do. They have internal career plans to be able to keep people on staff longer. So many of them are not turning personnel over nearly as much as you might see, say, as a CRO, for example. They have excellent IT infrastructures for data collection. And they also strive to work with the individual patients groups for better communications as well. So other personnel which are going to be key to having a successful study: the study coordinators, the lab physicians, the contract officers, the IT specialists, the QA and QC groups and personnel. They have to be properly motivated and educated to be successful on the studies. And all of these are key benefits in working within South Korea. A little bit about basic GCP principles that come into play that you'll also find in South Korea as well. Obviously, the ethical review of all studies, the clinical and non-clinical information that's relevant to be brought forward in the review of the CTAs. The study should be scientifically sound. The protocol should be very, very clear and fully delineated when written. The trial should be conducted in accordance to the study protocol that was approved by KFDA. The care and decision given to subjects will always be done under the responsibility of a medical doctor. Everyone playing their role will be trained and educated to the particular task that they are conducting on the overall study plan. The voluntary consent process is closely followed in Korea. And again, all information being recorded, handled, and stored in accurate reporting, interpretation, and confirmation. Of course, they follow confidentiality, patient confidentiality very, very strictly. The investigational products are managed in accordance with GMP, and that was approved by KFDA as well. And again, the studies will be conducted in the system under GCP and GMP to assure reliability. Informed consent is closely followed in the country. The investigators will inform the various groups about the concept of informed consent. The IRBs will review the documentation, the formatting here as well. And again, this is a process that they take very seriously. In the area of GMP requirements for study material, again, the main issues here that are also upheld in Korea is to minimize error, prevent contamination, prevent quality changes, prevent cross-contamination, establishing a high-level system for quality assurance, including the review of the facilities and the equipment where the study drugs are being manufactured, training and qualification of the key manufacturing personnel, the maintenance of SOPs and records as well. And, of course, under each one of these, there's a lot more detail that goes into play. From the standpoint of minimizing human error, organizational control, preventing contamination. So you'll see things under the buildings, facilities, and equipment, such as the HVAC, the ventilation system, the air filtration specifications for the various working rooms in manufacturing. Materials in contact with the dosage form being reviewed. The washing and disinfection areas and sterilization rooms being closely scrutinized. The other organizational control areas you see here from a hygiene standpoint, along with the training that's going to go along with that, are also operations which are closely reviewed by the agency. The system that's established for quality assurance from the standpoint of the layout of the facilities, the size of the facilities, the organization of the manufacturing data, from the standpoint of process validations, traceable records, keeping retention samples, doing self-audits on the facilities, and corrective actions for any complaints which may have come to the attention of the manufacturer as well. So you see here from the standpoint of how ICH, GCP, and GMP comes into play inside of the clinical trial startup mode is there's a lot of involvement along the way of GCP requirements as well as GMP requirements in manufacturing of the IMP. As you work your way down the process of the application review, the evaluation by the committee, what they will ask you, with the data they'll expect to see along the way, leading up to their final decision on the clinical trial application that's been submitted. How GCP and GMP comes into play from the standpoint of manufacturing licenses. The applicants who want to manufacture drugs or biologics have to go ahead and be scrutinized and be audited for GMP. The approval by KFDA, the required documents that go into play from the standpoint of drug manufacturing licenses at the same time. And also along the line of additional required documents, in the case of newly constructed buildings, there's a document that's needed for confirmation of ownership of the actual physical ground that the facility has been built on. And if it's an existing building, they'll be looking for a document confirming the lease contract which is being utilized. There's, again, to get this manufacturing license, you have to present all these materials. It takes about 25 days. It's not a very expensive application, but it's a process you need to go through. And the applicant obtaining that manufacturing license, the approval by KFDA, and the relevant application form going in, the safety and efficacy evaluation is typically done within 2 years of the date of issue, which means it gets updated every 2 years, including a review of the specifications. Basically, there'll be a GMP type review to some level in a manufacturing plant being located, and they'll have that expectation of the facility even outside of Korea. So they will take, like I said, GMP approvals from other healthcare authorities of a globally respected nature. The manufacturing license goes on to talk about that they will issue a conditional license, and this will then lead up to a final license in the manufacturing area. Once all the documentation has been submitted, it takes a little longer if the drug is also new to the marketplace. At the same time, could take upwards of about 85 working days to achieve this manufacturing license as well. Discussing recruitment issues on clinical studies as well. The investigators have their own pool of patients. Advertisements can be placed for clinical trials for disorders which are generally not seen in teaching hospitals. Again, these are going to be for rare diseases, rare disorders, rare indications. The pre-IND consultation was discussed. The multinational sponsors a lot of times think they don't need a pre-IND consultation, but I would highly recommend it, because if this is the first time you're working with KFDA, there'll be some requirements which may be new to you that you will probably waste more time going back and forth with them, submitting a CTA application which does not meet their full requirements, as compared to discussing it up front, having the session, knowing what's going to be validated, and then you can pull your application together and submit. The investigators in the country are very well trained. Many of them have spent time in U.S. medical centers. Again, they are closely connected. One can influence another one to discuss any patients they may have that may be appropriate for a new product which is going to be evaluated, etc. And of course, the monitoring activities that go on in the country are closely followed. You've got monitoring under study initiation, regular monitoring during and throughout the trial itself, and of course, closeout monitoring to resolve queries, an accountability checklist, and do an overall closeout report on the trial, which is very, very important because, again, monitoring is probably the most important aspect of the whole study if you want to pass regulatory scrutiny at the end for licensure. So again, in beginning that trial, it's highly recommended that a pre-IND consultation is put together to KFDA and any invitees that they may want to have at that session, again, to understand the full requirements prior to contacting the medical center, putting in an IRB application, and or submitting a clinical trial application. For the conduct of trials, as we talked about, being compliant to KGCP requirements, both from a preclinical and clinical data standpoint, understanding the guidelines via therapeutic categories that they've got from the various classifications that they have for products. Many of their guidelines are local implementation of the corresponding ICH guidelines, as we've discussed. And again, they have some that also bear closely resemblance to their own medical practices in the country as well. So for the area of preclinical and non-clinical studies, it's important to assure that you've got all of that information that they're going to expect as, depending on the product, depending on the indication, in your IMP that will be filed to them. And again, this can be waived based upon the amount of human-based study data which has been out there with the product before. So if you don't have it, but there's been quite a few studies in the product and the safety data is out there, you may be able to forego running any preclinical work. Again, in the area of safety and toxicity, again, the requirements here, again, for first studies in humans, the dose should be determined by careful examination. From a pharmacological and toxicological standpoint, the concept of, again, previously of the bridging work. And for, as we mentioned, the kind of tox studies that are required, the full list here may not all be required in your product. This is why it's going to be very important for you to have had a discussion with KFDA with your checklist of what you believe to be appropriate for the product at the classification level, at the risk level that you know of the product currently, and get KFDA to agree to that validated list of work. Continuing on, obviously, the appropriate pharmacological studies being certainly a major section by which they're going to want to see some information on how the product is absorbed, distributed, metabolized, or excreted within the body. So a very, very popular non-clinical area. The class of trials that we see here, phase 1 through phase 4, as you see here, the definitions as ICH has proposed them. Korea has adopted those definitions straight away according to the individual phase numbers of studies. So you're not going to run into any surprises in conducting studies in South Korea. From a human pharmacology standpoint, for a phase 1 trial, what's expected to be accomplished, of course, what studies would be appropriate to consider conducting. Again, I still list some of the bridging activities here, but they really want to be part of a global study, as we've mentioned. In the therapeutic exploratory area of phase 2 trials, what objectives are looking to be accomplished, and what studies should be conducted to be able to accomplish those objectives and supporting data that would go along with that. So about 33% of all experimental drugs successfully complete both phase 1 and phase 2. For phase 3 trials, again, now we're looking to confirm the therapeutic effects of the drug, demonstrate efficacy, establish a much more robust safety profile of the product, the risk-benefit assessment, and the studies here, obviously, to be conducted will need to be well-controlled, focusing on clinical safety, much larger patient population, and what we see here is 70 to 80% pass phase 3 testing that have passed phase 2 and become eligible for market approval. For phase 4, again here you're trying to define the overall risk of the product better after it's been licensed and placed on the market. You now have substantially greater data pool from which to develop that, to define better the quality of life improvement with the new therapy. Again, to see if there's a possibility of the product being self-administered if it wasn't originally marketed that way. So studies being comparative effectiveness between maybe existing products and this new product, mortality rates, obviously pharmacoeconomics come into play, and the evaluation of comparative patient and insurance costs and reimbursement. As you'll see, there's 3-stage design here in Korea, just the same way that we see it elsewhere around the world. Stage 1, where patients are randomly placed into parallel studies. Stage 2, they're responding well to the active treatment in stage 1 and are withdrawn from the study at random. And what you'll see in a stage 3 kind of design trial are the patients are not responding to placebo, but then they responded to open label treatments, are randomly withdrawn from the study. So all 3 of these are possible design options of trials in South Korea. So again, required documentation, depending on those 3 phases or 3 design structures that we've talked about. Documents, most of the time, they need to be submitted in duplicate. They have to be translated into Korean and addressed to the ministry. They are entrusted to the office of the IRB for those which have been routed for ethical review, and to for performing the clerical work, obviously. Again, sponsors don't pay the IRB directly or members of any compensation as the expert for the study. The sponsors pay the medical institution, and the medical institutions then obviously compensate the IRB. The following are going to be items that Korea required be continually monitored. And again, the qualifications and competency of the staff, the continual review and updating approvals of any study protocols, the investigational plan, discussing any deviations from the protocol, any changes that have been reported by the sponsor and approved by the IRB, and of course, record keeping is paramount, that it's current and kept up to date. The following will be monitored and reviewed regarding clinical trial reports, that the information being filed is complete, any missing patient visits have properly been recorded, informed consent has been obtained, non-compliance or withdrawal of subjects are well documented, and of course, if there's been any kind of a reason for termination of study, that's been also well documented. The monitor must fill out and submit a report to the sponsor after each visit to the medical institution that includes all of the following: information. From the auditing standpoint, there's two types of audits that are required for foreign manufacturers before a trial can begin. Typically, again, like I mentioned, this can either be done by KFDA or if it's related to the manufacturing facility, they can take that information from that particular center. But the building and facilities accreditation audit is required before the product can be registered or licensed. The quality management system must be in compliance via an inspection and audit. During the trial, sponsors must prepare an audit plan as part of the clinical trial plan and assign an auditor. They must be independent from those responsible for the product itself. And they have to prepare a report documenting their findings of their audits and provide a certificate verifying that the audit's been completed. A little bit about safety reporting on clinical studies. What you see here is KFDA being at the center of the safety reporting from the standpoint of where it's coming from, either from the hospital, the clinic, or the pharmacy. The individual cooperating agencies, foreign governments, the consumer can report in directly. The manufacturer is typically reporting also in either through the hospital and reports coming to them and also filed to KFDA. So there's a lot of exchange of information going on from the standpoint of safety vigilance. The reassessment and from the standpoint of being compulsory and a regular monitoring system, each category of pharmacological mechanisms or formulations is designated and announced to be reassessed. The Commissioner of KFDA has to notify that category of products that's going to be reevaluated at least 3 years prior to the reevaluation for all manufacturers and importers. It requires the submission of data. And again, this will come into play if there's some combination products, meaning drug and medical device, or biologic or vaccine and medical device. And the safety information can also come from the manufacturer or from the literature. In the area of vigilance reporting, for new drugs, you'll see that the required time frame for reporting is 6 years after licensure. And there's some different categories here that can reduce that quantity of time down to 4 years if it's been the same active ingredient and administration route, but may have different efficacy and effects. And the patient enrollment expectations that we see here, again, these are not cast in stone because the agency is looking for your involvement, for your suggestions here. But again, for new drugs being developed for the first time in Korea, they're expecting about a 3,000 patient enrollment in studies. As you go down the list here, for foreign development, new drugs development improved within 3 years after the approval date of the country. So most of these are going to be in that 3,000 type population. So as KFDA will review the data over this 6-year time frame, as we saw, the safety data that's being constantly reported to them, with annual reports within 2 months of the approval date of the license or the registration, the anniversary date. What they're expecting to see in this reporting from safety and efficacy of product being on the market, if there's been any kind of a market recall or there's been any amendments of an approved drug, So there'll be a process here for doing this for the application, the inspection that would go on, and for over this 6-year time frame for safety reporting. For reporting SUSARs, again, if there's death or life-threatening issues involving this, the report required is 7 days. You have another 8 days to give a more comprehensive analysis of causality. For other SUSARs, it's 15 days. Reporting that to the IRBs. There is a particular reporting form that must be utilized. The format is also required. I give some of the form numbers here. And the annual report is also a requirement in Korea. For foreign SUSARs, as you can see here, in most cases, they're also expecting foreign SUSAR reporting to be done within the country, and so it lines up pretty close, as if the same trial was being conducted in Korea. For reporting of serious and expected ADRs, for domestic ones and for foreign ones, for domestic it is required, for foreign it's not. And again, an annual report is required for both categories. For clinical trial closeout and reporting requirements, again, the setup for patient visits and final assessments, for beginning the plan of final notification of the study results, the preparation of the clinical trial report, the transition for the clinical staff and for patient care must also be part of this as well. So a few aspects of working locally, culturally in Korea, and which will also transcend to working with the agencies as well. It's important to understand, obviously, the business norms for a specific country, a specific region. Not all countries share the same attitude and values and mindset as well. India is very different than China, which is very different than Korea. So pay particular attention to the particulars of each region. But in general, our Western approach of getting things done quickly, being frank, making changes quickly is not the approach typically accepted within Asia. It's all about building relationships, establishing long-term relationships, assessing the integrity and the trust of the outfit and entity and applicant you're working with, and consensus is the way approvals are done. And they tend to take longer to build consensus, but when consensus is there, there's typically not a changing of the mind when they've taken an extra time to build that consensus. Working with the regulators, again, depending on what your issue is, whether it's industry-wide or very company-specific, you'll want to be either working this alone or possibly in concert with maybe your trade association and a membership, working with them. How well do you know your contacts? Do you know some folks at KFDA? State your reasons for your involvement, your interaction with them very clearly, very simply. Bring all your supporting documentation to the table and why you believe your position is a sound position to take from a scientific and ethical standpoint. Understand the key requirements under their laws. Become equally familiar with what is not specified, because now that defines the gray area of where negotiation can come into play. Obviously, always take the high road in your discussions. You're going to be working with the same people time and time again. So being courteous, being respectful. Remember, first impressions mean a lot as you march around the world and do your regulatory and quality work. And like I mentioned, this will mean a lot into how you're treated, how your company will be respected, and how your applications will be reviewed. So in final summary, Korea itself has very strong adherence to ICH guidelines. They have very qualified investigators. They have patient availability. They have strong patient-physician relationships. The patients follow the physician's instructions very, very closely. There's low dropout rates. There's significant opportunity here for development of product, as well as the market opportunity is growing in Korea. Knowing the procedures, knowing the processes are going to be the key to your success. There's a good research climate here. There's balanced regulatory requirements and costs. Again, putting to use what we've discussed today in this webinar will go a long way to your and your organization's success in operating in South Korea. I put a source list here of several websites that we've utilized and several documents that we've utilized in pulling the information together for this webinar, which hopefully will be helpful for you in the future as you work more detailedly within the country. And we hope that you have found this webinar to be informational in the short time that we've had. And at this point in time, I will turn it back over to Michael, who will introduce us into the Q&A session.
All right, thank you, Bob. Ladies and gentlemen, like Bob just said, we'll go ahead with the question and answer session at the moment. So in case any of you do have questions, this would be the time. What you could do is you could click on the raise hand option, which is a palm-like icon at the bottom of your participants panel for you to go ahead and ask questions. And you could ask questions verbally, or you could post your questions in the Q&A panel, and Bob will read it out loud and then go ahead and answer them. And if for any reason, if you're unable to ask your questions using either of the two means, you could go ahead and send your questions through chat to me, and I shall pass it on to Bob to answer them. And we also sincerely request you all to share your feedback. You would see a feedback form in the polling panel right now, and this feedback form has over 6 questions, mostly multiple choice, and it wouldn't take you more than 2 minutes to go ahead and answer them. And also, the polling panel will remain open till the end of the session, so you could go ahead with your questions if you do have any, and we shall take them first. And also, we would be grateful if you could fill up the feedback form, because it would let us know if there are any improvements to be made. It would certainly be helpful. And just waiting for any questions at the moment. Bob, I do not see any questions at this point in time. I'll just allow an extra 30 seconds to see if any of your attendees do have any questions.
Certainly.
And ladies and gentlemen, I just also would like to just keep you informed that you could go ahead and let us know about any feedbacks. You could send us an email at webinars@globalcompliancepanel.com, or if you feel that any of your team members or colleagues might benefit from this webinar, we are happy to inform you that you can get this in the recorded format, and it could be purchased from our website, or you could always give us a call. The numbers are 1-800-447-9407. And also any suggestions and ideas on how we can improve as well would be much appreciated. And also you could see the future webinars from Robert Russell on the screen. These are a couple of them. You could see them on the screen. So in case you are interested, you could definitely go on our website and register yourself for this webinar, or you could also go ahead and give us a call. The numbers are on your screen, and you can give us a call, and we'll be more than happy to help you out. And Bob, I do not see any questions at this point in time, so I guess we will conclude the session. Any concluding remarks, Bob?
No, I just refer to my summary comment slide as the current existing clinical trial environment in Korea. It's a good country to consider, especially needing to include an Asian population for ultimate licensing, and several of those comments in working with the agencies and conducting studies in Korea. We wish you luck in this area. If you have any concerns or questions, please feel free to contact us at any time.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, like Bob said, you could go ahead and contact him or email him as well in case you have any questions. On the slides, you do have his email address and the numbers as well. So in case you have any questions or remarks, you could always give him a call as well. Bob will go ahead and end the session since there are no questions at this point in time. I really appreciate your session, Bob, and thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. And on behalf of Global Compliance Panel team and Mr. Russell, thank you for attending the session, and hope you all have a pleasant day ahead. Thank you so much.